Chapter 1. Addie Myers leaned forward across the table, talking animatedly about her work. She was doing the only thing she'd ever really wanted to do, and she wanted to share it with the world. She loved being excited about her work, unlike so many of the young women she knew. Just then, she was sharing it with the most recent man her roommate, Jennifer, had set her up with. So every weekend, I teach a class in a different kind of craft to mothers and children. A kind of mommy and me class for crafts. Bob continued acting as if he was paying attention, by staring straight at Addie's cleavage as he'd been doing the entire night. Sounds cool. He'd said very little else in the hour and a half she'd spent with him so far. She was glad they had met at the restaurant, so she wouldn't have to let him escort her home. That would just drag out the time she was forced to spend with him. She took another bite of her lasagna, trying to continue the conversation, but getting more than a little annoyed with the man. "What do you do for a living, Bob? Do you have a job, Bob? Do you work with the mob, Bob? Please don't make me sob, Bob." When she was bored, she always made up rhymes in her head. It made her happy. Bob tore his eyes away from her chest and finally met hers. She was certain it was the first time all night. If she asked him what color her eyes were, he'd probably respond with a guess as to her bra size. "What a boob." "Huh? Did you ask me something?" Addie closed her eyes and mentally counted to 10. "I asked what you do for a living." It was a pretty typical first date question. She hoped he'd prepared an answer. Bob shrugged, his eyes going right back to her breasts. "I'm a mid-level manager for a paper company. We do stationery and that kind of thing. Kind of boring, really." What a shock. Boring Bob has a boring job. She put her hand over her mouth to stifle the giggle over her rhyme. "Sounds fascinating," she lied. "How do you know Jennifer?" "Oh, she's dating my brother." "She didn't tell you?" "No, she didn't tell me." "She also didn't tell me you were so obsessed with a woman's mammary glands, you were incapable of having a conversation. It's hard to believe that sweet Andrew has such a lecher for a brother." "I see." She finished her meal in silence, wondering if Bob would ever be able to tear his eyes away from her chest long enough to carry on a conversation. After the waiter inquired whether they wanted dessert, she sighed. "I think maybe I should get a sticker with an eyeball on it to put on my chest, don't you?" Bob shrugged again. "I guess so. That way we could make eye contact." She stood and picked up her purse. "I'll catch a cab." "Good night, Bob. Thanks for the delicious meal and the titillating conversation." Addie rushed out the door to the street, holding her hand up for a taxi. It was a cold March evening, and it had started to snow. She loved snow in November. By March, she was ready to never see another snowflake again. She climbed into the back of the taxi. "Where to?" "Greenwich Street." She leaned back, trying to block out the smell of stale smoke. Closing her eyes, she thought over her boring date. Why did her roommates insist on boring men for her? Did she really seem that boring? She knew she worked more than her share, but boring? She didn't think she was that boring. When they'd arrived at her apartment, she'd paid the cab driver. For a minute, she just stood there in the snow, her face raised to the heavens. Why was finding a good man so difficult? She had a degree in marketing, was a successful businesswoman, not bad to look at, especially her breasts apparently. Why did she attract men like boring Bob the Boob? She'd never been anyone's idea of a sex object, though. She had dark blonde hair and green eyes. She was slender, but not model slim. Like every other woman in the country, she wished she was thinner. No, she wasn't drop-dead gorgeous, but she didn't make small children run away in tears either. She sighed and headed toward the main entrance of her apartment building. When she reached the apartment she shared with 3 other women who were also in their 20s, she unlocked the door, praying she'd be alone for a few minutes. That was a date she needed some time to recover from. Her roommate Danielle was sitting on the couch with a tub of popcorn watching Notting Hill. She looked up at Addie. Another bad date? Addie sank down onto the couch and took a handful of popcorn, even though she wasn't at all hungry. It was awful. His name was Bob, and he spent all night starting at my chest. Boring Bob the boob. She rolled her eyes. What's wrong with me that I keep ending up with creeps like him? All I want is a regular guy who will treat me right and love me. Do they still exist? She sure hoped they did, because she didn't want to spend the rest of her life alone. Danielle paused Notting Hill on a close-up of Hugh Grant's face. You really want to know what I think? Danielle was a petite blonde who made Addie, at 5'4", feel like a giant. She was just tiny. Addie took another piece of popcorn and chewed it slowly while studying her friend's face. I don't know. Do I want to know what you think? Danielle was working on her master's in psychology, and often her opinions hit too close to home. I think you're letting people set you up who have no business finding their own man, let alone one for a friend. You need a professional. Addie let out a bark of laughter. What? You mean like a dating website? There's no way. She'd heard too many stories of creepy men who met women through dating sites. No, I mean like a professional matchmaker. A woman with a PhD in psychology who has a proven track record. Yeah, like someone like that exists. Addie rolled her eyes at the very idea of someone with that kind of education wasting her time matching people. It would be ludicrous. Danielle grinned. Well, I just happen to know someone. She turned sideways on the couch so she was fully facing her friend. You know, I'm doing my internship this semester with this bigwig relational psychologist? Yeah. She's got a matchmaking business on the side. It's called Matchrimony. Isn't that an awesome name? Danielle was obviously excited at the idea. What she does is she finds people, and after extensive interviews, she pairs them up. The catch is they meet at the altar. So like you, for instance, you have a business here in the city, so she would either find you someone who works really close to here, or doesn't mind relocating. Then you'd see him for the first time while you're walking down the aisle. She's got a great success rate. Addie shook her head adamantly. There's no way. I let people set me up for dates and look at the freaks I end up going out with. Imagine what would happen if I let someone find me a husband, and I had no veto power. I couldn't do it. Will you at least agree to meet her? I promise, you'll love Dr. Lachele. She's sweet and quirky and has purple hair. What more could you ask for in a matchmaker? I don't think so. Thanks for the suggestion. Addie stood up and stretched. I'm going to go take a bath and wash the feel of Bob's eyes off my body. I'm going to take my iPad in there and watch a movie, so I may see you later, but I may not. Have a good bath. Danielle called out as Addie disappeared into the bathroom. She stared at the door for a minute after it closed. Addie needed Dr. Lachele. More than anyone she'd ever met. Asterisk. Jake Roberts ignored the ringing of his phone. He was in the middle of a scene where a dragon was tamed by a beautiful princess. When the ringing stopped and started again immediately, he let out a growl and snatched his cell phone up, not bothering to check the caller ID. What? Sorry to disturb you. It's Scott. Is it important? I'm in the middle of a scene. Scott was his best friend, but he really wasn't in the mood to be disturbed by anyone just then. Want to call me back when you're done? Jake sighed. No, I'll get back to it. What's up? He wandered into the kitchen of his small house and snagged a Coke from the fridge, glancing out the window. It was dark. How had that happened? Savannah wanted me to invite you over for dinner tomorrow night. She said that you're just to the point in your book that you were probably forgetting to eat again. Jake started to protest, but he was sure Scott could hear his stomach growling, so there was no point. Sure. I can do that. What time? He did need to eat, and he loved his best friend's new wife. Besides, he hadn't seen their baby in a couple of weeks. He needed to take the little rugrat a couple more books. About 6. I'll be there. Jake hung up without another word. He needed to get some food in him and finish a scene. He felt drawn back to the computer as if it was a magnet, but stopped and shook his head. No. I need to eat first. Wandering back into the kitchen, he checked the refrigerator. There were more Cokes, but little else. Opening the freezer, he hit the jackpot. A frozen pizza. While it cooked, he could finish up his scene. Perfect. Asterisk. Jake got to the ranch just before 6 the following evening. He banged on the front door, a gift for the baby under one arm, and a dozen daisies in his other hand. Savannah opened the door with the baby cradled in one arm. She took the flowers and inhaled deeply. Thank you, Jake. She stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek before wandering into the kitchen to put the flowers in water. Jake knew her well enough to know to follow her to the kitchen. How old is Caden now? 3 weeks. She expertly put the flowers in water using only her free hand. Carrying them to the table, she put them in the center. There. Perfect. Glancing down at the baby, she smiled. He's asleep. I'm going to put him down. She wandered to one of the small bedrooms on the first floor of the huge ranch house and put Caden in a bassinet before closing the door softly, careful not to wake him. I made a bison stew, she told Jake as she wandered back into the dining room. Oh, yum. I need something hot. He looked out the window. It was snowing again. He was sick of the snow. Where's Scott? He's taking a shower. He'll be down in a minute. They chatted about his book and the baby for a few minutes until Scott joined them, his hair still damp from the shower. Hey, Jake. Jake nodded to Scott. I've decided to run away with your wife. You want us to take the baby or leave him with you? Oh, leave him with me, Scott said. I know she can live without me, but she won't last without the baby. Savannah laughed as she served the stew into bowls, which she carried to the table. I made a loaf of fresh bread to go with it. Jake was practically drooling. I need a woman to take care of me. I don't care what she looks like, just so long as she remembers that I need to be fed every few hours. Savannah and Scott exchanged a look. I think you should talk to Lachele at Matchrimony, Scott told him. The two men had been best friends since childhood, and he knew if anyone could convince him to do something as stupid as calling a matchmaker, it was Scott. Jake laughed. Sure. Savannah leaned forward. We're serious. Jake, you don't trust anyone, because you're afraid all women are after your money. If you meet at the altar, that worry is gone. Why not at least talk to her? Jake looked back and forth between the two. Well, I know it worked for you too, but really? How could she possibly find a woman for me? A woman who would put up with being ignored 90% of the time for a computer. Women just didn't go for that kind of thing. Just ask her. Savannah insisted. Jake sighed. Fine. I'll call her as soon as I finish my book. He had at least 2 weeks to go on it. They'd probably forget by then. Savannah shook her head. After dinner. It'll be too late in New York to call after dinner. She gave him the woman look that Jake knew meant she knew he was just making excuses. I'm not going to let you forget on purpose, Jake. Forget on purpose? What does that even mean? Jake? You're calling her after dinner. Savannah handed him the plate with the bread on it, and he took a piece, recognizing the futility of arguing. Asterisk. Addie wove her way through the restaurant. Danielle had texted her that she was waiting at a booth in the corner. She spotted her friend's blonde hair, but who was with her? Wait, hadn't she said the woman she worked for had purple hair? She frowned, but decided to give her friend the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Dr. whatever her name was had forgotten her lunch and hadn't wanted to eat alone. She slipped into the booth beside Danielle. Hey. Did you order for me? I only have an hour. I got you their baked potato soup. No chives. Danielle grinned at her. You always get the same thing. Doesn't everyone? Addie looked at the woman across from her, noting her sparkling green eyes and her purple hair. I'm Addie Myers. Hi, Addie. I've heard so much about you. I'm Dr. Lachele Simpson. Most people call me Dr. Lachele. It's nice to meet you, Dr. Lachele. I've heard a lot about you too. Do you enjoy your work? It felt strange eating lunch with two people who had made psychology their life's work. She wasn't up for being psychoanalyzed during her lunch hour. Oh, yes. I love introducing two people who I know are meant for each other. It satisfies me in a way nothing else ever could. Dr. Lachele's voice was soft and sweet. Addie felt drawn to her immediately, in a wary sort of way. If she hadn't been so nervous around her, she thought the woman would make a great friend. Why don't you tell me about yourself, and we'll get the ball rolling? What ball? Addie looked at Danielle. I told you I wasn't willing to be set up. Good gravy, Danielle. You could have at least told me that so I wasn't coming here blind. Dr. Lachele gave Danielle an annoyed look. You know better than to force someone to talk to me. Danielle had the grace to look ashamed. Normally I'd agree with you. You don't know Addie, though. She keeps getting set up with these losers. Who was the guy last week, Addie? Boring Bob the Boob, wasn't it? Addie shook her head. Jennifer set me up with him. Why was she being blamed for Jennifer's mistake? Give Dr. Lachele a chance. She's really good at this. Danielle leaned over and whispered. I think she already has someone in mind for you. Addie sighed. I guess we can at least talk, since you've already wasted your time by coming here. She was intrigued at the idea that Dr. Lachele may have someone picked out for her. She wanted to find the right man. Lachele looked back and forth between the two friends. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do, Addie. Addie crossed her arms over her chest. That's good, because I won't do anything I don't want to do. I don't know what kind of women you usually work with, but I assure you, I'm self-confident and know how to think for myself. Lachele nodded. Do you mind if I take notes while we talk? Asterisk. Once the process was started, Addie was amazed by how quickly everything went. In mid-April, she went to her parents' house to talk about what she'd done. The youngest of 7 children, Addie was nervous to admit to her parents that she was going to be walking down the aisle in less than 2 weeks toward a man she'd never met. At this point, all she knew was that he lived in Montana, and he was flying there to marry her. It wasn't a lot to go on. Her mother brought cookies and coffee from the kitchen like she did every time someone visited. Her mother had been 42 when she was born, so she was now approaching 70, and she had the silver hair to prove it. Addie took the cookie and leaned back in her chair, trying to find the right way to explain what was happening. She'd rehearsed the conversation 15 times on the subway on the way over, but still, she felt at a loss for words. I'm getting married, she finally said after her parents had filled her in on her brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews. Her mother squealed, clapping her hands together. Oh, I'm so happy for you. I didn't even know you were seeing anyone. When do we get to meet him? Addie took a deep breath. You can meet him the day of the wedding. It's a week from Saturday. She wanted to close her eyes to escape from the looks on their faces, but she couldn't do that. She had to act like she wasn't at all nervous about what she was doing. Addie's father looked at her with a worried look. You didn't get yourself in trouble, did you? She smiled at her father's old-fashioned phrase. I'm not pregnant, Dad. Why can't we meet him before the wedding? Her mother asked, looking confused. He lives in Montana, Addie replied, saying a quick prayer that they wouldn't ask any more questions, but she knew they would. They always did. How did you meet a man from Montana? Her father asked. Was he here on business? Vacation? They knew she hadn't left the state in a good long while. Addie sighed. I haven't actually met him yet. We're meeting at the altar. Her father got to his feet. He was a retired New York City police officer, and was still in tip-top shape for his age. What do you mean you haven't met him? Addie looked down at her hands. She hated disappointing her parents. One of my roommates works for a woman who runs a matchmaking business where people meet at the altar. She tricked me into meeting the woman, but it didn't take me long to agree to let her find just the right man for me. She shrugged, wishing she could convince them. I've gone out with so many men over the years, and not one of them was interested in marriage. I want to get married and start a family. You two have always been such a shining example of how a marriage should be. I'm ready to stop looking and start living. There, maybe flattery would work. What's the name of this business? He asked, still standing over her as if he was going to decide to discipline her at any moment. Matchrimony. I'm going to research it. See what I can find out. If I find that it's a bad company, do you promise not to go through with it? Of course. Her father had been a police officer for many years. She trusted him implicitly. All right then. Do you know the man's name? She shook her head. No. I'll find that out on my wedding day. A slow smile spread across her mother's lips. I'm so glad you're going to give it a try. I've been worried you'd be alone forever. Just make sure your father checks him out before the wedding. I promise. It'll be all right. Addie sat at the back of the church, wearing her eldest sister's wedding dress. Her parents had convinced her that she shouldn't buy a dress when she wasn't sure the marriage would last. She didn't tell them that she'd signed a contract agreeing to spend at least a year with the man if she went through with the ceremony. She had until she said, I do, to change her mind, but after that, she was legally bound to stay with him unless he hurt her somehow. You're going to be fine. Dr. Lachele is really good at what she does. You're going to be so happy, Danielle told her, squeezing her hand tightly. I hope so. Addie looked at Danielle, wearing a dress in a soft pink, a bridesmaid dress she'd worn for another wedding. I'm nervous. Saying the words aloud just made everything worse. She wanted to kick herself for not pretending everything was just fine. You'd be stupid if you weren't. You're about to marry a man you've never met. But trust me. He's going to be right for you. Dr. Lachele breezed into the room then, surveying the situation. Good gravy, girl. You're not getting nervous now, are you? Why, I found the man who's just right for you. I'd go so far as to say that he was put on this earth just for you. But I don't even know his name. Addie exclaimed. For her, that was the hardest part. She didn't care what he did for a living or what he looked like, but she hated not knowing his name. Lachele sat down in a chair opposite Addie, stroking a stray hair from her face. His name is Jake. And he's going to take one look at you and think he's got an angel walking toward him. Addie frowned. And then he'll realize that I'm headstrong and belligerent at times, and he'll decide it's a fallen angel he found. Lachele laughed, shaking her head. Not Jake. He's not going to be terribly easy to live with, but it's going to be worth it. Trust me. He's your soulmate. Addie wasn't even certain she believed that soulmates existed, but she just nodded to humor the older woman. I'll take your word for it. I gave his name to your father, because he wanted to have him investigated before the wedding, So we're going to be delayed by about 30 minutes while he runs a background check. Lachele shrugged as if the delay meant nothing. What if he's planning on whisking me off to Tahiti as soon as we marry? Addie asked. She'd planned for a week off after the wedding. Her assistant manager was perfectly capable of running the shop, even though Addie had rarely taken a day off. Then you'll have to catch a later flight, Lachele told her. Besides, I told him to plan on spending the night here in New York tonight. The first matrimony wedding ended with the couple running for a flight to Montana. I don't think a bride should have to worry about leaving her own reception early just so she can catch a flight. Do you? Addie shook her head. I guess not. She wasn't certain she'd ever be ready to leave the reception. What if the man repulsed her? She wouldn't want to actually be alone with him. What if one of his eyes was made of glass and he kept giving her a funny look? What if he had 15 other wives spread throughout the country? Lachele got to her feet. You're going to love Jake, which is a good thing. Addie frowned as she watched the other woman run toward the door. Why is that a good thing? As long as they were able to stay together, the woman had done her job, right? Because I need more matrimony munchkins, of course. Addie looked at Danielle after the door had closed. She's full of energy, but she's odd. Danielle shrugged. She's more than a little crazy, but that doesn't mean she's not good at matchmaking. I never said it did. Addie protested. It was right at half an hour later when Addie's father came into the room. He's an interesting man, but no criminal record. You should marry him. When her father said nothing else, Addie wondered what he was hiding. And? She wanted to know every detail her father had found out. Why wasn't he disclosing everything? You agreed to marry a stranger. I'm not giving you details. He looked at Danielle. Lachele said you need to get your sweet cheeks out there, so you can walk to the front of the church first. Danielle jumped to her feet and hurried from the room. Addie looked at her father. You're really okay with this? Mr. Myers nodded. I couldn't be more okay with it. He's a good man. Addie got to her feet and smiled. Thank you for checking him out for me. It makes me feel like I'm going to be safe. Not that she wouldn't be anyway. In her eyes, her father was equivalent to Superman. If she called him and told him something was wrong, he'd be there in moments. He kissed the top of her head. You're a beautiful bride. Don't tell your sisters, but you outshine every one of them. Addie smiled, certain her father had said the same thing to all three of her older sisters on their wedding days. Thank you, Daddy. He offered her his arm as they left the room, walking toward the door at the back of the sanctuary. Addie forced herself to breathe slowly, extremely nervous now that the time was here. She was about to walk down the aisle to a stranger she'd be spending the rest of her life with. What was she thinking? At Lachele's nod, the back doors of the sanctuary were flung open, and the entire congregation got to its feet. She walked slowly down the aisle, her hand clutching her father's arm harder than it should have been. She couldn't get past her nervousness. Her eyes went to the man at the front of the church, who was staring at her with a half-smile on his face. He was a tall man with dark hair and brown eyes. They seemed to twinkle at her as she walked. She couldn't believe her luck. Why on earth would such a nice-looking man be searching for a bride through a matchmaking service like Matchrimony? Why, he was handsome enough, she was sure women fell at his feet. Once they reached the front of the church, her father placed her hand into Jake's, and the two of them took the 3 steps up to stand before the pastor. Dearly beloved, we are here under unusual circumstances as we join this man and woman in the holy state of matrimony. Not many couples are able to agree to meet each other for the first time mere minutes before they exchange vows, but that's exactly what this couple just did. They set eyes upon one another as she stepped into this sanctuary and started her long walk down the aisle toward the man she'd spend the rest of her life with, a man she'd never before laid eyes on. Addie looked at Jake to see how he was reacting to the pastor's words and saw that he was looking right at her. He hadn't taken his eyes off her since she'd stepped into the sanctuary, and she never wanted to stop staring at him. Surely it was a good sign that they found one another so physically attractive, wasn't it? She repeated her vows as instructed, and accepted the ring he put onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Lachele must have provided him with her ring size. When he kissed her, it was as if the world stopped for just a moment. The kiss was short, but for all its brevity, it caused more rioting emotions than she'd ever experienced. Yes, she was meant to marry this man. Chapter 2. Addie took Jake back to the bride's room as soon as the ceremony was over. She wanted at least a few minutes to talk to her new husband. She didn't even know what he did for a living. Not that it mattered. She didn't believe in divorce, and she'd signed a contract not to separate for a year. When they got to the room at the back of the church, Jake did what he'd wanted to do in front of the entire congregation. He pulled her into his arms for a real kiss. He put his hands at her waist and looked deeply into her eyes. "I didn't want to embarrass you with a real kiss in front of everyone." Addie felt breathless as she stared back at him. His eyes were a deep chocolate brown, and she felt as if she could be lost in them. "You didn't?" He shook his head. "No, but we're alone now." Her mouth turned up into a slow smile. "We do seem to be alone. I wanted to talk for a minute, but I guess that can wait." She was babbling, and she wished he'd kiss her to shut her up. She'd never been so nervous, or so excited, at the idea of a kiss before. He stroked her cheek with his index finger. "You guess?" He slowly lowered his head. Addie had enough of waiting. She wrapped one arm around the back of his neck and pulled him down for a kiss. As soon as his lips touched hers, she felt electricity shooting through her body. She moved closer to him, her breasts pressing against his chest. Never had she felt so much passion. Even when she'd kissed other men, she hadn't felt this strongly. How had Dr. Lachele known he was the one for her? What magic formula did it take to see two people apart and know they were meant to be together? Jake let out a low groan and lifted his head. Who'd have thought Lachele knew so much about matchmaking? Addie grinned, leaning her head against his shoulder. "She was certainly right with us." She took his hand and led him over to two chairs, sitting beside him. "Can we talk for a minute?" He shrugged. "Do I have to stop touching you while we talk?" She laughed softly. "I'd rather you didn't." She couldn't believe how strong the attraction was between them. She turned to face him. "Dr. Lachele said you live in Montana?" He smiled. "I currently live in King, Montana, which is a small town outside of Billings. I've lived there my whole life, but I'm open to moving." He was not only open to moving, he coveted the Manhattan Library. He'd move into it if he thought he could get away with it. Her eyes widened. "You are?" "I was hoping you'd say that." She frowned. "What about your job?" "Oh, that's not a problem. I'm a writer." He watched her face carefully as he said it, hoping he wouldn't see dollar signs appear in her eyes. For some reason, people thought that if he was a writer, he made a boatload of money, which wasn't necessarily true. It was in his case, but it didn't have to be. "Oh," she said with a frown. "I can't make ends meet on my own." "Will you be able to help with the bills, at least a little?" She'd known a few people who called themselves writers, but they'd had to wait tables to make ends meet. Jake blinked a couple of times at her misunderstanding. He started to correct her, but immediately thought better of it. Better if she thought of him as an impoverished writer trying to put out his first or second book. "I can help some. Couple $1,000 a month?" She sighed with relief. "Oh, that's great. That'll be enough with what I make. I found a little apartment, but it's just out of my price range on my own. With that added to my income, we'll be fine." She didn't mind helping him reach his dream by taking on the bulk of the bills. He may eventually have to get another job, but for now, they'd be fine. Jake couldn't believe how excited he was at the prospect of getting to know her without his money being a huge issue. He was almost as excited about that as he was to get back to the hotel with his new bride. Good. He lowered his head and kissed her again. How soon can we get away from here? Addie blushed. We have to go to the reception. My whole family is out there. But she wanted to be alone with him too. She was a 25-year-old virgin, and she was convinced she was lacking in some way. She'd never even been tempted to sleep with one of the men she'd dated. Of course, 2 or 3 dates was all it had ever been for her. Jake sighed. Fine. We'll go to the reception, and I'll pretend not to be fantasizing about removing that beautiful dress from your body. Normally Jake wouldn't have been so forward, but she was his wife. He could say what he wanted. She was sure even her shoulders were blushing at that point. The dress she'd borrowed from her sister left her shoulders completely bare, so she was sure he knew how embarrassed she was. I think we should be around other people. We'll talk more later. He grinned, happy that he could make her so uncomfortable. He considered it a good sign. Much later. I have a feeling other things are going to need to take precedence for me. He got to his feet and took her hand in his. Let's go greet everyone. As they walked toward the church's fellowship hall, she was very aware of the man at her side. She had signed a contract to spend the next year of her life with him, no matter what. It was good so far, but was that only because their hormones were running rampant? Her mother made a beeline for her as soon as she stepped into the room with the rest of the guests. Are you all right? He didn't hurt you, did he? Mom, we just talked. He's a nice man. Addie turned to Jake. Jake, this is my mother, Carolyn Myers. Mom, this is Jake. Her mother had seemed all for the wedding the last time they talked. Hadn't her father told her that he'd only discovered good things during his investigation? Her mother nodded. It's nice to meet you. My husband was a police officer and still has a lot of connections. Just so you know. With that, she turned and walked away. Addie was mortified. I'm sorry. She's really freaked out about me marrying a stranger. Want to know a secret? He asked, his lips close to her ear. What? I didn't tell my parents. Would your mama be freaked out too? Addie asked, giggling softly. She could just picture a tiny little woman with white hair chasing after him with a frying pan, telling him he shouldn't marry a stranger. Definitely. She'd be calling you Lizzie Borden by now, convinced you'd murder me in my sleep. He didn't add that his mother would think she'd murder him for the money. Did that really matter? She introduced him to her brothers and sisters, and finally her father, who shook his hand. I want you to know I had you investigated, her father said. Jake nodded, his eyes meeting the older man's. I assume you found nothing negative? Did he know about his pen name? Jake knew it was a matter of public record. Mr. Myers shook his head. Nothing. I'll still be keeping an eye on you, but for now, you have my blessing. I'm happy to hear that, sir. I'll take good care of your daughter. He hadn't realized he'd be so nervous meeting her father. Of course, he was the man who would be taking the other man's daughter to bed that night. It was an odd relationship. I trust that you will. Billy Myers smiled at his daughter. You know where to find me if you have any trouble. Addie smiled. She didn't know why her father being overprotective made her feel safe, while her mother doing the same thing just made her angry. Thank you. I'll be fine. She squeezed Jake's hand, which had been in hers since they walked into the fellowship hall. Where are you taking her for a honeymoon? Billy asked, his eyes on Jake. We're going to a small resort in South Dakota known for its healing waters. In fact, the name means healing waters. Addie looked at Jake. I didn't realize we were going anywhere. That sounds interesting. Jake shrugged. It's off the beaten path, and the same family has owned the place since 1874. I went to college with the man who runs it now. Kyle McDonough. He was a good friend. Addie nodded. His friend must have gotten him a discount. She was glad he knew how to be frugal. I only have a week off work. That's fine. I was only planning to stay for a week. I'd go crazy if I had to take longer than that off work myself. Billy eyed Jake. What city is the resort in? I want to know where you're taking her. It's called Whisper Creek. It's not really a city, just a small town. Closest decent-sized city is Rapid City. It's got a lot of character. I've been a few times. Jake studied Addie. Did you pack for a honeymoon? He could think of things he hoped she'd packed, but he'd be just as happy seeing her in nothing at all. She nodded. Yes, and I packed for any weather. I have bathing suits and ski suits. She shrugged. I'll condense what I really need into one suitcase, and we can drop it at the new apartment on our way to the airport. That works for me. Jake looked at her father. Do you want my cell phone number? Would that make you feel safer? Billy nodded. Yes, I think it would. Then I have 2 numbers to reach the 2 of you at. Oh, I have an idea, Addie interjected. I brought both suitcases here to the church. If I condense into one suitcase, would you take the other home with you, Dad? It would make it easier for us tomorrow. Jake nodded. It would. Our flight is at 9. It would make it a lot easier. I'd be happy to. Okay, I'm going to go move the winter clothes into one suitcase and summer stuff into another. I just need summer stuff, right? Do I need any dress clothes? She was mentally going through everything she'd packed. Why hadn't she thought to put all the cold weather clothes into one suitcase and the warm weather into another as she was packing? She should have thought ahead. Usually she was a great deal more organized than this. There are nice restaurants we'll go to. I'd pack lots of shorts and a couple of nice outfits. Jake cared almost nothing for clothes, but he could tell his little bride would want to be dressed correctly for everything. If you'll excuse me, I'll go pack. She squeezed Jake's hand and smiled at her father. Jake looked at her. I'll come with you. Thinking about the nightgown she'd packed for their wedding night, she shook her head quickly. No, it's fine. I'll be right back. She hurried toward the door, hoping he'd take a hint and not follow her. Jake watched her go with a frown. What could she possibly be hiding from him? Her father had already walked away, so he wandered over to where Savannah and Scott were standing in the corner. Dr. Lachele was holding Caden, fussing over him. She's getting the stuff she needs all into one suitcase for the honeymoon, he said to no one in particular. He just didn't know anyone else, and he didn't want to look stupid standing alone in the middle of the room at his own reception. What do you think of her? Savannah asked, keeping her voice soft. She's gorgeous. She seems smart. I have no complaints. Jake watched the door, hoping she'd come back through it. Oh, you will, Scott told him. Even Savannah and I had a rough patch at first. It's hard being married to a total stranger, even if you know you're supposed to be a good match. Scott winked at Savannah. Jake grinned, remembering how clueless Scott had been at first. Well, I'll do my best to make her happy. I'm sure we'll be fine. He knew better than to accuse his wife of having PMS if she got angry with him for doing something stupid. Dr. Lachele looked up from the baby. You will. Just remember, no separating for the first year, because you two will have it all figured out by then. And I need more matrimony grandbabies, so hurry up on that. Jake shook his head. We've only been married for a couple of hours. Slow down. He had no desire to add babies to his brand new marriage. He wanted time to savor his wife first. No. You hurry up. I need dozens, please. Jake looked at Scott. I'm not having dozens of babies. Are you having dozens of babies? He wasn't going to bend to the will of a crazy purple-haired woman. He didn't care if he had known her his entire life. Scott shrugged. Probably not. But if she keeps matching couples up, she'll get her dozens. Savannah laughed. I'm not having dozens, but a few more would be really nice. Scott swallowed hard. How many is a few? I didn't much like watching you go through labor. Savannah linked her arm through Scott's and leaned into him. Another 4 or 5 maybe? Scott shook his head adamantly. 2 more. That's my final offer. Savannah rolled her eyes, but said nothing. Lachele looked back and forth between the couple who had almost reached their 1-year anniversary. You tell him, Savannah. Addie rejoined them then, going to stand beside Jake, who automatically wrapped an arm around her shoulders. All done. Dad has my suitcase, so we're all set. The only strangers at her wedding were right in front of her. They must be Jake's friends. Jake looked at her with a grin. Does that mean we're ready to go? Addie blushed, knowing exactly where his mind was going. You could introduce me to your friends first. He was certainly in a hurry to start their honeymoon. It was embarrassing that he was so openly enthusiastic about it. Jake sighed. She was going to insist on staying a little longer. This is my best friend since childhood, Scott Ward. Scott, this is Addie. Scott held out his hand. It's nice to meet you, Addie. You've got a good guy. Addie smiled. I think so. Of course, I'll let you know how I feel about him in a couple of months. She was very aware that she would be annoyed by some of his traits. She had never known a married couple who didn't get annoyed over toothpaste. All the fights seemed a bit different, but they were all about toothpaste. Scott grinned. I know how you feel. Savannah and I were married in this same church a year ago. Lachele fixed us up too. Addie's eyes widened. You're a matrimony couple? How's it going? Her first instinct was to grab Savannah by the arm and drag her off, asking how things had gone, but she couldn't do that. Scott looked down at his beautiful blonde wife. It's wonderful. I'm happy. She's happy unless I'm doing something stupid, which happens more than I care to admit. We're good right now. You already have a baby. And you've only been married a year? Addie didn't want things to happen so quickly for her. Slow and steady when it came to babies. Savannah grinned. We both wanted children and saw no reason to wait. Addie looked up at Jake. I want to wait at least a year before we start trying. Jake nodded, more relieved than he could express. That sounds good to me. It's not something we need to decide at our reception. Addie smiled, but inwardly she disagreed. It needed to be discussed before the wedding night. She'd gone to the doctor for birth control, and she didn't want to deceive him by making him think there was a chance they'd have a child when there wasn't. Dr. Lachele looked at Addie. You have my number for when you need me, right? Addie frowned. When I need you? You mean if? Savannah laughed. She means when. Trust me on this. Jake's a good guy, but it's just a matter of time. A New York woman and a Montana man are bound to clash. Addie eyed Savannah. Maybe I need to get your number as well. Oh, you definitely do. In fact, I already wrote it down for you. Savannah handed a small card in an envelope to Addie. Feel free to call me during reasonable hours. I will. Addie clutched the envelope, knowing she'd need the moral support of the other woman. The situation was too strange to go through alone. She would need someone who understood. Jake looked at Scott in mock fear. Should we allow this? They won't plot against us, will they? I'll let the allow comment slide, because you don't know me well, Addie said mildly, winking at Savannah, who grinned. Jake raised an eyebrow. You don't think it's your job to obey my every whim? He didn't think that a man should be in charge of a woman either, but he wanted to see her reaction. No, I really don't. Addie looked at Lachele, playing along with the teasing. Why don't you screen these men better, Dr. Lachele? I'm going to have to get a divorce before I even have a honeymoon. Lachele looked up from the baby. You'll do fine. She nodded to Scott and Savannah. If those two could make it, anyone could. Addie looked at Savannah again, wondering what had happened between the other two. Jake interrupted her thoughts. We're going. We've dallied long enough. Addie raised an eyebrow at her new husband. Dallied? You use dallied in regular conversation? It wasn't that she didn't know and like the word. She just didn't know anyone who actually used it. I'm a writer. I use lots of words in regular conversation. He shook hands with Scott. Thanks for flying out to be my best man. Scott nodded, a smile on his face. Anytime. You just let me know when you need me, and I'll be there. Addie hugged Savannah. So nice to meet you. I'll be calling you. I'll be waiting for the call. Jake and Addie made the rounds, saying their goodbyes. Carolyn glared at Jake over Addie's shoulder. Be careful. Call me if there are any problems. Your father will be on the next flight. I'll be fine, Mom. Addie turned to her father and hugged him as well. Don't worry about me. Billy hugged her back. I'm not worried. He's a good man. You'll do fine. Addie was surprised her father had become a supporter of Jake, regardless of what he'd found in the man's past. He was usually a great deal more skeptical. They went to get her things from the bride's room. I checked into a room at a hotel before I came here. I hope that's all right. Addie was surprised when he named the hotel. It was a legendary New York City hotel that was certainly out of her price range. That's wonderful. How could you afford that? She knew the question was rude, but she wanted to make sure he wasn't spending money he shouldn't on the expensive hotel. I have connections. Jake wasn't certain how long he'd be able to keep up the starving artist charade, because he tended to like the creature comforts. He hailed a cab, showing her he'd spent some time in New York previous to that day. When had he been there? You've been in New York before? She asked. I was here for Scott's wedding and ended up extending my stay because of the Manhattan Library. Addie smiled. One of my favorite places in the whole world. His eyes lit up as he faced her in the back seat of the cab. Really? You're a reader? She nodded. I'm a voracious reader. I thought about having a small second-hand bookshop after college, but instead decided on my craft store. Tell me about your store. He loved to listen to her talk about anything. Addie smiled. Well, my craft store is different than any other I've ever seen. It's not tiny, but it's not big either. I sell craft patterns, both new and second-hand, and I offer support. I only sell crafts that I, or someone on my staff, knows how to do well, and we're there to lend a hand. We have classes that teach each of the crafts. For instance, I have a crochet class I teach every Tuesday afternoon, and I teach a mommy and me paper crafting class on Monday mornings. She frowned. I'm not home a lot, because my job is very demanding. If he couldn't understand her need to work, they'd never last. I understand having a demanding job. The voices in my head don't let me stop until I put enough words on paper to satisfy them. The voices in your head? You realize that makes you sound more than a little bit crazy, right? She liked it though. Well, she liked it as long as her parents didn't hear it and come unglued. He shrugged. However it makes me sound, it's true. I have all these stories that want out, and I have to make it happen. I'll go nuts otherwise. Then you should make the stories happen. She leaned her head against the back of the seat, facing him. Do you enjoy writing? So much. I think I'd do it even if no one ever bought a single book. I just need to be able to get them out of my head. He reached out a hand and used his index finger to trace her upper lip. I'm not a poet, but you make me want to write odes to your beauty. Odes to my beauty? She giggled a little. It's going to take me a while to get used to the way you speak. Jake leaned over and kissed her softly. I'm more worried about how quickly you'll get used to my touch. She blushed. I don't think that's going to take nearly as long. The taxi driver pulled up in front of the hotel, and Jake got out, holding the door for her. He paid the driver, and then walked around to the back of the taxi to take her suitcase. Thank you, he called, holding her hand firmly in his as he pulled the suitcase into the hotel. He headed straight for the elevator, hoping she wouldn't need to eat, but realizing she probably would. They'd only served cake at the reception. Are you hungry? He asked. Addie put her hand on her stomach. She was hungry, but she was also nervous. She wasn't sure if she could eat. A little. We could get room service. I'd like that. They got off the elevator and walked down the hall to a room on the right. He inserted his key card in the door and held it open while she stepped inside. Oh, well. She looked around the room in amazement. She'd heard a great deal about the hotel, but she'd never imagined she'd stay in a room so lovely. The view is awesome. She slid open the door to the balcony and stepped out. She loved Manhattan late in the afternoon. It felt so special to her. She couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Jake set her suitcase on a bench in the room and followed her out to the balcony. He wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his cheek atop her head. I can't believe we're really married. She smiled, leaning back against him. I can't either. It all happened so fast. What made you decide to go see Dr. Lachele? He asked, wondering how a beautiful woman like her had ended up meeting a man and marrying him at the same time. It all started with a man I like to call Boring Bob the Boob. You see, my roommates were constantly setting me up with different men. Most of them were pretty worthless. I lived in an apartment with 3 other women. One of them, Danielle, worked for Dr. Lachele. I went out with this absolute creep who wouldn't stop staring at my chest, and he couldn't manage to string a sentence together because he was so busy ogling me. That's how he got his name. Boring Bob the Boob? Jake grinned, the writer in him loving the alliteration. The husband in him wasn't pleased to hear that the man had been staring at his wife's breasts, but they hadn't met at the time, so he couldn't complain too much. Yes. Boring Bob the Boob. Anyway, when I got home from that awful date, my roommate Danielle told me about Dr. Lachele. She suggested that the reason I kept going out with losers was because I kept letting people who had no idea what they were doing set us up. I told her I wasn't desperate enough to see a professional matchmaker and marry whomever she found for me on site. You did? How did we end up here then? Well, the following week, Danielle asked me to meet her for lunch, and Dr. Lachele was there, thinking I was ready to hire her. It took us a minute to connect, and at first I was furious with Danielle, but I listened to Dr. Lachele and decided I could agree to at least give her a chance. She sighed, actually happier at this moment than she thought she'd be. She felt so comfortable with Jake. It was as if she'd known him a great deal longer than she had. I'm glad you did. His words were simple, but they carried a lot of weight. She turned to him, a smile on her face. I'm glad I did too. He leaned down and kissed her, his tongue tracing the outline of her lips. His hands went to her narrow waist, pulling her flush to his body. She was still wearing her wedding dress, and all he could think about doing was peeling it off her. He backed into the hotel suite, having left the door standing open behind him. He turned once they were inside, not breaking the kiss, so he could close the sliding glass door that led to the balcony. He moved them toward the couch, which he knew was beside the balcony door, sitting on it and pulling her into his lap. "I want to make love to you," he whispered against her lips. Addie was surprised at the heady feeling of power at his words. She'd never before felt like she had so much power over a man. She sank into his kiss, her lips parting for his tongue. Her hands tugged at his jacket, pulling it off his shoulders, before removing his tie and unbuttoning the top button of his shirt for him. He couldn't be comfortable in the restricting clothes. Jake was thrilled at her actions, and his hands went to the tiny buttons running up and down her back. He wanted to groan, hating the idea of having to slowly maneuver each button out of the hole. As he was struggling with the second button, his finger rubbed against a zipper. Were the buttons just for show? Why would someone do that? Sure enough, when he tugged at the zipper, her dress opened at the back, and his hand slipped inside, only to encounter a slip underneath her dress. He wanted to touch bare skin. "Stand up," he whispered, breaking the kiss. "I want to get this off you." Addie blushed, but she stood, turning her back to him so he could push the dress off and unfasten her strapless bra, before turning her back around to face him. When she stood before him in just her panties and stockings, which were held in place by garters, her face was red. She forced her hands to remain at her sides, trying not to cover herself in her embarrassment. Jake's eyes traveled her body from head to toe. She had full breasts, a narrow waist, and wide hips. Everything about her was just perfect in his eyes. "You're beautiful," he whispered reverently. "I've never seen such a beautiful woman in my life." Addie swallowed hard. She needed to tell him, but she wasn't sure how. Would he mind? "I've never done this before." Jake's eyes widened, and a slow grin transformed his face. "You're a virgin? I didn't think they even existed anymore." She nodded. "Does that bother you?" She'd never felt comfortable enough with a man to let him touch her so intimately. She'd only known Jake for hours, though, and it felt right to her, even as it felt wrong. She was so confused. He shook his head. "Of course not." He got to his feet, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her softly. Scooping her up into his arms, he carried her into the bedroom, setting her on her feet next to the bed. "I want to teach you all there is to know about lovemaking." He finished unbuttoning his shirt and removed it, tossing it on the floor. He kicked off his shoes, ignoring where they landed. His socks came next, because he didn't want his new wife to see him without his pants on for the first time when he was still wearing socks. How stupid would that look? He unbuttoned his pants and dropped them to the floor, watching her eyes as they went to the tent formed at the front of his boxers. He could see she was nervous, but he had no idea how to soothe her. "You okay?" he whispered softly. She nodded. "Just a little scared," she answered honestly. "Don't be. We're both going to enjoy this." Chapter 3. Jake pushed Addie back onto the bed, following her down. He'd get rid of his boxers later, when she was less nervous about what he was about to do to her. His lips toyed with hers for a moment, while one hand went down to cup her breast, his thumb stroking her nipple. "You feel so good." She let out a soft moan. She'd never let another man touch her bare breasts as her new husband was doing. She now knew it had been smart to have that rule, otherwise she could have let things go too far. She was shocked at how sensitive her nipple felt under his thumb. She wrapped her arms around him, her hands roaming over his back. She was surprised at the muscles she found there. He must work out, because no man could get this strong by riding all day. He broke off the kiss and rolled to one side, propped on his elbow. He let his free hand continue to toy with her nipple, his eyes on her face. "Do you like that?" She nodded, biting her lip to keep from crying out. It felt strange letting him touch her that way, but oh so good. Something that felt this good had to be wrong. "Is there anything you want me to do?" he asked, his eyes on hers. He wanted to take things slowly, because he didn't want to hurt her, but his body was screaming at him to hurry. She had no idea how to answer that question. She'd never done this before, but she assumed he had. "I don't know." He chuckled softly. "Okay, how about this? I'll do what I want to do, and if you don't like it, you tell me to stop." "Is that even possible?" she asked, before covering her mouth with her hand. Had she really just said that to him? She knew it was the 21st century, but she'd been raised to have strong morals. It was odd that anyone would touch her this way, and it would be all right. Even her husband. He raised an eyebrow. "That bodes well for our lives together." He got to his knees and slid her garters down her legs, and then slowly rolled her stockings down and off her feet. Once the stockings were on the floor, he brought her foot to his lips, kissing the arch. "You are the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." She shook her head, unable to force her tongue to respond. His lips were causing sensations she'd never dreamed she'd feel, to shoot up her legs and into her core. She spent well over 40 hours a week on her feet, leaving her feet tired and sore almost all the time. His kiss made them suddenly feel alive with energy. After a moment, he dropped her foot and moved to her hips. "Raise up." When she did as he told her, he caught the band of her panties and pulled them down her body, dropping them on the floor. Once she was fully nude, he simply stared for a moment, unable to believe his luck. He'd agreed to marry a woman sight unseen, and she was prettier and more special than any he'd ever met. God was certainly watching over him. He moved back so that he was beside her, his hand going back to her breast, while his lips toyed with hers. "I'm the most blessed man alive," he whispered against her lips. Addie closed her eyes, enjoying how cherished he made her feel. And how hot. She couldn't discount how hot he made her feel. His fingers felt like magic against her skin. She nipped at his neck, her teeth scraping his skin, and he let out a groan. He kissed a trail from the corner of her mouth, down her neck, and to her breast. He took a moment to touch the tip of her breast with his tongue, before taking the nipple inside and suckling. She arched off the bed toward him, her hands clutching his hair, to keep him close. She felt restless and wiggled on the bed, not sure what she was supposed to do, but knowing the feeling was too intense for her to remain still. His hand trailed down her stomach and to her thigh, one moving between her legs, to stroke her. His thumb went to her nub, rubbing it gently, while he carefully inserted a finger, his lips never leaving her nipple. All of the sensations at once made Addie crazy. She lifted her hips to meet his hand, moaning softly. Jake was encouraged by her reaction, moving his thumb faster. He wanted her to reach her pleasure, before he caused her the inevitable pain. He kept his eyes open as he suckled, watching her face. He could tell she was close to her climax, so he moved his thumb a little faster, and she clenched around his hand. He removed his boxers and knelt between her legs, reaching a hand down to guide himself to her entrance. He pushed in quickly, thrusting through her maiden head, trying to make the pain quick. Addie moaned softly as he hurt her, but the pain was gone before she knew it. It wasn't exactly pleasurable for her, but because she'd felt so much pleasure before, she didn't complain. Soon he'd rolled off her and was gathering her in his arms, raining kisses over her face. "You're an incredible woman, Mrs. Roberts." Addie smiled, snuggling close to him. She may not have enjoyed it as much as he had, but she enjoyed being close. Right then? That was all that mattered. She laid in the curve of his arm for a long time after, listening to the sound of his heartbeat. She couldn't believe she'd just done that with a total stranger, and that she'd enjoyed it so much. "Tell me what you write," she finally said, once the silence had grown uncomfortable. He turned to face her on the pillow, his hand stroking up and down her bare arm where it stuck out over the top of the sheet. I write science fiction. And you like it? She couldn't imagine the work that went into writing a book, especially a book where she had to create her own world, as was the case with most science fiction. She was an avid science fiction reader, so she was familiar with the genre. He nodded. I do. I have a series of books about dragons that I write. He deliberately didn't mention the name of the series, because if she read science fiction at all, she would recognize it. How many hours a day do you write? She asked. The idea of someone writing books, taking nothing and creating something, fascinated her. It was so similar to what she did with her crafts, yet still so different. Anywhere from 14 to 16, he answered honestly. I'll try to keep it to 14 when you're around. She blinked. How do you find time to eat? He shrugged. I don't always. Scott used to come over once a week, just to make sure I got fed. Now I don't always remember until I'm done working for the day. Don't your hands hurt at the end of it? A lot of times, they do. I have a lot of problems with tendinitis, but I take ibuprofen for the inflammation. Sometimes my eyes quit working by the end of the day. My back is always killing me from being bent over a keyboard. The voices in my head don't care. They want the words out. And my fans? They finish a book and an hour later ask when the next one will be out. Sometimes I just want to scream at them that I just finished a book, and they should give me a week to glory in the finished product, but I know that's never going to happen. They think I should write until my eyes bleed. He gave a half laugh. I'm being overly dramatic. They don't really believe that, but sometimes, I think if it meant they got their books faster, they'd feel that way. Human limitations are tough. You have fans? Really? He must be more successful than she'd initially thought. He nodded. It's strange. I mean, I'm just this boring guy from King, Montana, and I have fans all over the world. She made a face. None of them ever stalk you or try to find you, do they? He shook his head. So far, I've avoided the science fiction conferences and stuff, so no one knows what I look like. I write under an assumed name, so no one knows who I really am. I like living a quiet life. It sounded to her like he must be quite successful to have the kind of fans he'd mentioned, but she didn't say anything. Maybe writers had to be terribly successful before they made any kind of real money. Well, I promise not to tell anyone that you're a writer. It'll be our little secret. He grinned. You can tell Scott and Savannah. They already know. He leaned forward and kissed her nose. And I owe you an apology. You told me you were hungry, and I said we'd order room service, and instead I dragged you off to bed right away. I wasn't exactly kicking and screaming. No, you weren't, and that makes me very happy. He rolled to his side and out of bed, striding naked across the room to get the room service menu which he brought back to the bed. What are you hungry for? She'd been only slightly hungry earlier, but now she was downright peckish, to use a British word she loved. Why don't you get me all of page 3? He laughed. All of page 3, huh? Without even looking to see what's on page 3? She sat up beside him on the bed, making sure she kept the sheet tucked firmly under her arms to conceal her breasts. She rested her head against his shoulder as she read the menu as well. You know it doesn't matter if you keep them covered, right? He asked, a gleam in his eye. What? She asked, pretending she didn't know what he was talking about. You don't have to keep your breasts covered. I've licked them and touched them enough that I know their exact shape and look. There's no need to bother. She blushed, shaking her head at him. Well, that wasn't exactly gentlemanly of you to point out, was it? He laughed, the sound filling the room. Maybe not, but guess what? What? I liked looking at them, touching them, and licking them. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Addie decided to ignore him as she read over the menu. Can I get a burger, fries, cheesecake, and a Pepsi? Pepsi? Are you kidding me? No, I love Pepsi. He groaned. It was one of the rare hotels that carried both Coke and Pepsi products. I'm a Coke lover. I don't know how we're going to make this work. So if I accidentally spill Pepsi all over myself, you won't lick it off? He grinned at her. If anything could make me a Pepsi lover. He picked up the phone for room service. How do you want your burger? Medium well. She got up to use the restroom, and pulled the sheet off the bed, wrapping it around her completely sarong style. She wasn't going to walk around naked. She'd leave that for him. Asterisk. An hour later, they'd eaten and set the dishes out in the hallway for the housekeeping staff to pick up. She wasn't certain what she was supposed to do. It wasn't quite bedtime yet, but she hadn't brought her computer to do bookwork on. Since opening her store, she had spent all her time at home doing the store's financial work. Adding the daily numbers, calculating costs, working on payroll. It took a couple of hours every night. Added to the number of hours she spent at the store, there was little time for anything else. Tell me about this place we're going to, she finally said, wanting to hear about her honeymoon location. Oh, it used to be one of those fancy places where the idle rich would go to take treatments back in the 1800s. Now, it's been restored to be as much like it was back then, but with the modern touches we need. There are carriage rides throughout the grounds, and the hot springs are available to soak in. We can rent horses and go horseback riding, or even wander to an old-fashioned-looking mercantile that has the 1880 price of everything right alongside the 2015 price. That's one of my favorite places to go. I love to learn about history. Oh, it sounds wonderful. It is. The decor is something straight out of a history book, but hidden behind little panels are plugs for our chargers. The bathroom has a beautiful old-fashioned clawfoot tub with hot and cold running water. The lobby is the same as it was the day they opened, and you sign in on this giant register. Of course, they keep the computers out of sight, but you can tell they're tapping away at the keys when they're checking people in. She smiled. I'm going to love it. I really think you are. I love the restaurant, because the servers dress in the same uniform they used back in 1874 when the resort opened, but people can dress however they want. All of the furniture is antique, and they use real glass dishes. They do their best to keep up the illusion of being in the 1870s. I love it there. We fly out tomorrow? Yeah, we fly out in the morning, and we will come back a week from tomorrow. Then you go back to work Monday? He asked, wondering if he would go nuts not writing for that long. He could dictate into his phone if he just had to, and he could also write with pen and paper if he got really desperate. He didn't want her to think that his job would always come first. Yeah. My assistant manager will cover everything until then, but I'm going to be on call. I don't think she'll bother us unless it's life or death, though. She studied him for a moment as she cuddled into his side on the couch. I work 60-hour weeks, and then come home and work some more. Is that going to bother you? He wanted to jump for joy. She was just as much of a workaholic as he was. Lachele did know what she was doing. That's fine. I really work at least that much, so I'm not going to get jealous of your work. He just hoped she wouldn't get jealous of his. She wondered absently if he'd cook since he'd be home alone all day, but she didn't ask. It just made sense that he'd put dinner on. Good. It was the one thing I was worried about. Honestly, I was worried about the same thing with the kind of hours I keep. I don't need a wife who gets angry every time I sit down to work. Do you ever have problems with writer's block? She asked. I don't even believe it exists. Writing is 5% making up stories and 95% putting your butt in the chair and doing the work. I've met so many people over the years who call themselves writers because they come up with stories and write a chapter or two. That's not writing. Writing is putting in the hours to tell the entire story beginning to end. He sighed. And I'm on my soapbox again. Tell me to shut up, would you? She laughed. I have better ways to shut you up. She knelt on the couch beside him and cupped his face in her hands as he'd done to her. She kissed him softly, her tongue stroking into his mouth. After a moment, she pulled away, resting her forehead against his. Effective? She asked. Oh, very effective. Why, I'd let you use those methods all day. Asterisk. They left for the airport early the next morning, and Addie was extremely excited to see the healing waters. He hadn't told her the real name of the place, because he said he couldn't pronounce it. It was a French name. She was sure she'd see it on a sign somewhere. They'd gone to the shore a lot growing up, but she'd never been as far west as South Dakota. She wondered if they'd have a chance to see Mount Rushmore or any of the touristy places in South Dakota while they were there. At the airport, they waited their turn, and she was surprised to find out he'd booked first-class seats for them. She was beginning to wonder about his finances. Was it possible that he had an inheritance from somewhere? How was he able to afford all the extravagances? She hoped he hadn't overextended himself with their honeymoon to impress her. He let her have the window seat on the plane, and she was excited. She'd never flown, and it was fun watching the clouds go by. They had a connecting flight in Salt Lake City. By the time they landed in Rapid City, it was late afternoon. Addie was surprised at the size of the airport in Rapid City. Even the airport in Salt Lake City had seemed tiny in comparison to JFK. He rented a car as if he flew all the time. She frowned watching him. He certainly didn't act like a struggling writer. On the drive to the resort, she watched out the window, marveling at how flat everything was. It's like another world. I have a hard time believing we're in the same country. He laughed softly. I feel the same way about Manhattan. Where I live in Montana, there's nothing. Billings is the big city, and it's tiny in comparison. I love Manhattan, though. Nowhere else in the world has a library like that. Not that I've seen anyway. You only married me for my library, she joked. Oh, no. That's not true. I married you for your breasts. I'm just not as obvious about it as boring Bob the Boob. She laughed. Bob was a real treat. And you're allowed to stare. We're married. And touch? I'm allowed to touch too, right? Don't push it. She was grinning as she watched out the window again. When they reached the resort, she tried to read the sign. It said Les Eaux de Garrison Place of the Healing Waters. She didn't speak French either though, and decided to abbreviate it to Healing Waters. She wasn't going to twist her tongue in knots trying to say a name that obviously was never meant to be said. When they walked in the front doors, a man rushed over to them and pounded Jake on the back. Well, if it isn't the famous science fiction writer. When's the next book coming out? Jake groaned. When it's done, freak. How's the little missus? Pregnant. The man, who must have been Jake's college friend, said with a grin. Very, very pregnant. You can't be very pregnant. Pregnant is one of those things you are, or you're not. Kind of like dead. You can't be very dead. You're either dead, or you're alive. Writer, the owner snarled. Businessman, Jake returned with a scornful curling of his lip. Addie decided to ignore what the men were saying to each other, so she wandered off, looking around the hotel. It was huge, and just as Jake had said, was decorated in the manner she would have expected from an 1874 bathhouse. The walls and railings of the two-story building were white, and there was a large red woven area rug on the floor with gold accents. Jake joined her a few minutes later as she stood gazing at a painting of a woman in an old-fashioned bathing costume. Do you want to wear one of those? He asked. She laughed. If I could look as beautiful as that woman in it, I would do it in a heartbeat. You'd look a million times more beautiful. His words were sincere. Let's go to our room and get unpacked. Do you want to go in the waters or swim in the pool? We could go for a horseback ride. Or we could nap. Napping is always an option. He waggled his eyebrows at her in a way that told her there would be no sleeping done if she chose the nap option. Addie yawned dramatically. I'm really tired. I think a nap may be in order. They'd reached their room by that point, and he unlocked the door with the key he'd been given. Unlike most hotels, the resort still used regular keys. Once she'd preceded him into the room where their luggage was already placed, he pulled her close. Nap sounds good to me too. Do you want to nap on top of me? Or do you want me to nap on top of you? She giggled as he kissed her, knowing exactly how this nap would turn out. Chapter 4. By Saturday evening, Jake and Addie had done a bit of everything the resort had to offer. She had shopped in the old mercantile, ridden horses, gone for a romantic carriage ride one evening, and spent more hours than she could count partaking of the healing waters. She felt closer and closer to her new husband every day, so happy they were getting along so well. For their last night, Jake had requested a picnic hamper from the kitchen, and they had taken 2 of the horses on a ride across the rolling hills. Finally, they'd found a place for a picnic, and they'd spread the quilt the resort had provided onto the ground. Addie dug into the hamper finding plates, glasses, a carafe of lemonade, fried chicken, potato salad, and pickles. There was even a pound cake for dessert. She piled food onto both plates, and handed him a fork to eat with. They really outdid themselves with this. I didn't see on any of the brochures that we could request a picnic, she told him. Oh, it's not a regular service they provide. They just do it for me, because I'm friends with the owner. Which was part of the truth. The other part was that he bribed them a more than respectable sum to do it for him. Are you ready to get back to the real world? She shrugged. I'm ready to see how my assistant did while we were gone. I'm surprised she didn't text even once. It had been everything Addie could do not to text and check in on her, but she knew that Bailey was a capable woman, and she didn't want her to think she was watching over her shoulder. What about you? He shrugged. I've had a wonderful time here. I'm glad we were able to get away to get to know one another, but I'm starting to get itchy to get back to work. He'd taken a paper and pen into the bathroom the day before, and written a couple of pages the old-fashioned way. He didn't want her to know how much he needed to be working while they were on their honeymoon. Will you work as soon as we get home tomorrow? Or will you wait until Monday morning? He hadn't even considered waiting. Would it offend you if I got to work tomorrow evening? He hoped it wouldn't, because he didn't want to start their marriage off by sneaking out of bed to go to his other love, work. Oh, not at all. All of my stuff was moved to the apartment while we were gone. I'm going to have unpacking to do, and I know I'll want to call my assistant manager. No, home means business as usual. She shrugged. Just because she was married didn't mean she could neglect her duties. Jake breathed a sigh of relief. Good. She had the same kind of work ethic he did. They would get along just fine. Asterisk. When Addie unlocked the apartment the next day, she looked around in amazement. She'd asked her former roommates, sisters, and brothers to help with the move. Obviously they'd done so much more than she'd expected. She'd thought to walk into an apartment with boxes everywhere, but it was neatly arranged, even her knick-knacks were out. On the counter was a note, saying that Danielle had done it as part of her wedding gift. She suggested they use the time they would have spent unpacking wisely. Addie grinned, knowing she would do just that. Jake had shipped a bunch of things from Montana, sending them to Lachele. The 2 women must have gotten together, because his things were put away neatly as well. He spotted his laptop at a desk in the corner of the room, and as soon as he saw it, he was mesmerized. He sat down, turned it on, and he forgot about everything around him. Addie laughed as she watched Jake become reunited with his computer. She went into the bedroom and called Bailey, catching up on the happenings from the store while she was gone. Once that was finished, she went to her own laptop and did the paperwork from the week using the information Bailey had emailed to her daily. When she was finished, she called Jake's name, but he didn't even notice, so she walked into the kitchen to fix something for supper. She frowned. There was nothing to fix. She walked back to her computer and ordered groceries to be delivered. There was no point in living in a huge city if you didn't take advantage of the delivery options there. She went into the bedroom to call her mother while she waited for the groceries to be delivered. Yes, everything's fine. We just got back from South Dakota. The resort was amazing. It was like stepping back into the 1870s. Truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. He didn't hurt you, did he? He treated you all right? Addie blushed, knowing her mother was talking about the wedding night and wanting to have no part of that discussion. He was great. I have no complaints. Really, I think Dr. Lachele found the right man for me. She could hear her mother sigh. Well, I hope it continues that way. Most marriages don't last, and you're starting out with a huge handicap, not knowing the man you married. I'm getting to know him quickly. Don't worry. Well, your father checked him out, and he says he's a good man. Her dad got on the phone then. You have a good time, Addie? Addie smiled, happy to hear her father's voice. Yes, it was wonderful. South Dakota is beautiful. We stayed near the Black Hills, and I had no idea they were so pretty. I checked out the area when he gave me the name of the resort. I'm sure it was nice. Did they really make it feel like you were in the 19th century, like they said? She laughed. All except the indoor plumbing. That made it pretty obvious what century we were in. I felt like I had the best of both worlds. Good. Do you go back to work tomorrow? He asked. Yes, I do. I've already talked to Bailey. She said everything went well while we were gone. I've caught up on paperwork. Just waiting for groceries to be delivered now. That's my girl, always throwing herself at work and getting things done. I'm glad you're home. I am too. I had a lovely time, but you know what they say. The best part of getting away is always coming home. You'll have to come for dinner one night this week, so we can see for ourselves he didn't murder you in your sleep. Her dad's voice was full of laughter, but underneath it, she knew he was concerned. Well, it's going to be a busy week at the store. How about on Sunday when we're closed? I'll tell your mother to expect you then. After church? Addie hesitated. She and Jake hadn't really talked about going to church. She knew he was a Christian, but he gave her the impression that he typically worked 7 days a week until his eyes bled. I'll let you know about time later in the week. Will that work? Yeah, that's great. We'll see you Sunday. Addie hung up the phone and wandered back to the kitchen, familiarizing herself with where everything had been put. She'd chosen a tiny apartment, barely 600 square feet, so Jake was writing in the living room. She walked up behind him and peered over his shoulder, curious about the story he was writing. Jake was in the middle of a huge scene when he felt her behind him. What are you doing? He asked, trying to keep the irritation out of his voice. I'm just curious about what you do, she said with a shrug. I write words. Lots of them. But I can't do it with someone watching over me like that. It's creepy. He knew his words would sound harsh to her, but he hated to be interrupted, and the sooner she learned that the better. His work was the most important thing in his life. Addie bit her lip, wondering why he was upset with her. I'm sorry. I'll find something else to do. She wandered into the bedroom, trying her best not to get upset. She hadn't expected the harsh reaction to just seeing what he was writing. She couldn't believe it was such a big deal to him. She found a book from the shelf beside the bed, and laid down on her stomach to read it. It was a science fiction book by her favorite writer, Roger Holiday. She hadn't gotten to his 3 latest, but they were lined up on her shelf just waiting for her. Within minutes, she'd forgotten all about her new husband's surly attitude and was deep into her book. The doorbell ringing startled her, but she hurried to the door, opening it wide for the groceries to come in. She looked over and saw that Jake was still tapping madly away at his keys. He sounded like a machine gun, and she wanted to ask how fast he typed. He was truly a speed demon. Once the groceries were paid for, and the tip had exchanged hands, she put the groceries away, trying to decide what to make for dinner. She quickly decided on one of her favorite chicken dishes, and started the preparations. She sang softly as she worked, enjoying the idea of eating her first meal at home with her new husband. She sat at their tiny bar, the only table in the apartment, reading her book while she waited for the food to cook. When it was finally ready, she served it on 2 plates, put a candle in the middle of the bar, and set everything just so. She wanted everything perfect. It was their first meal in their new home after all. When she was finished, she called his name. "Dinner's ready." She waited a minute, and when there was no response, she walked over to Jake, saying it a bit louder. "Dinner's ready." When he didn't respond again, she put her hand on his shoulder. He looked at her with a confused expression. "Yeah? Dinner's ready." Jake nodded. He always ate while he worked. "Oh, good. Thanks. Would you bring it to me?" There was a clear spot to the left of his keyboard. "That would be perfect." Addie stood wavering for a moment and finally walked to the counter, blew out the candle she'd lit, and brought him his plate, fork, and a glass of Coke. "Anything else I can get you?" she asked in her best waitress voice. "No, that's good. Thanks." He didn't even look at her as he continued pounding away at the keyboard. She wasn't even certain he knew she was there. She sighed, walking back to the counter and sitting down to eat. Their honeymoon had been great, but she wasn't certain if she could handle him ignoring her all the time. She ate in silence, rinsing her dishes and putting them in the dishwasher. She put up the leftovers, thinking he could eat them for lunch the following day, before looking over to see if he was ready for her to wash his plate and utensils. His food looked untouched, though, so she went to the bathroom to take a bath with her book. It was going to be a long night. She'd made it through more than a third of her book before she stood up to go to bed. She'd been reading on the couch, thinking that if she was in the same room with him, he'd realize she still existed. Finally she stood, walked to where he was, and again put her hand on his shoulder. Obviously she was going to have to touch him to get his attention. "I'm going to bed," she said in a soft voice. She'd put on a new nightgown she was certain he'd like and waited for him to look at her in it. At least he knew she was there when they were making love. "Good night. I need to finish this chapter before bed." He didn't look up. Addie stared at him in disbelief. "Good night." She went into the bedroom, feeling more rejected than she ever had in her life. She shut the door, not wanting to hear the keyboard, and climbed into bed. Closing her eyes, she wished for sleep. Who would have thought it would take only a week of marriage to become invisible? Asterisk. Addie woke alone the following morning, surprised to see the spot on the bed beside her untouched. Had Jake slept on the couch? She couldn't imagine why he'd be mad at her. She got up and wandered into the living room, and there he sat, typing just as frantically as he had the night before. She didn't ask any questions as she fixed breakfast, making him a plate of eggs, toast, and bacon. She wondered if he'd gotten up, but she could tell he'd gotten himself more water, and his plate from last night was lying in the sink. There was an empty bag of chips beside him. She walked over and put the plate beside him and went to get him a glass of orange juice. When she set it beside him on the desk, she put her hand on his shoulder. "I made breakfast." His eyes flickered to her. "What time is it?" 8. The store opens at 10, so I try to be there by 9:30. Oh. I guess I wrote all night. He took a sip of the orange juice. Thanks for breakfast. He turned back to his computer and started typing again. Would you mind starting dinner this evening? She asked. I have it all made up, you just need to put it in the oven at 7. It's a foil-wrapped glass baking dish on the bottom shelf in the fridge. Cook it at 350 for an hour. Yeah, sure. He kept typing. Addie shrugged and ate her own breakfast, getting ready for work. Her employees had a uniform, but she tended to dress in slacks, comfortable shoes, and a nice blouse. She glanced at him as she was leaving. Don't forget to start dinner at 7, all right? Yeah, sure. While she was gone, he worked. He took a break around noon and napped for 2 hours before getting back to it. He'd promised the book would be completed by the end of the month, and taking a week off for his honeymoon had put him way behind. Asterisk. On the subway ride home, Addie couldn't help but wonder if she'd done something wrong. Jake had been perfectly attentive during their honeymoon, and she'd even thought he was starting to care for her, but as soon as he'd arrived home, he'd started typing like his life depended on it. Everything had gone even better than she'd expected at the store while she was gone, so she took the plunge, deciding to give up the 6-day work week she'd had for years, and drop down to only working Monday through Friday. Her assistant could easily handle the store on Saturdays. She couldn't wait to tell Jake that they'd have 2 days together every week instead of just one. Yes, she knew that a lot of the housekeeping chores would need to be done on Saturdays, but at least they'd be able to work on them together. She opened the door, expecting to smell the dinner she'd worked hard to put together the previous evening. Instead, she saw Jake sitting at his computer, typing madly, and she could smell nothing. Did you start dinner? He ignored her, typing away. She took a deep breath and counted to 10, walking to him and putting her hand on his arm. It took him a minute, but finally he looked up. Oh, you're home. Yes. Did you put dinner in the oven like I asked? Dinner? You didn't ask me to put dinner in the oven. What are you talking about? She frowned. How could this be the same man she'd spent last week with? This morning, after I gave you your breakfast, I asked you to put dinner in the oven at 7. I didn't hear you. You said, yeah, sure. You had to have heard me. Why was he lying? If he forgot, he should just tell her he forgot to do it. I never heard you. Did you ask while I was typing? He asked, frowning, trying to understand what had happened. Yes, but we had just been talking, and you responded. He sighed. If I'm typing and you need me to do something, you need to have me repeat it back to you, so you know I really heard you. Are you kidding me? So you're responding to me without even listening to my questions? Why would you do that? He shrugged, realizing he was in over his head. He got to his feet and reached out to hug her. I'm sorry. I've learned to ignore everything that happens around me when I work. I call it being in the zone. It keeps me from being totally derailed by distractions. She stiffened in his arms. So not only did you stay up working all night instead of coming to bed with me, you spent all day working and didn't even start dinner. You realize that we're married, and it has to be a partnership, right? His first thought was that she should be staying home, cooking all the meals, and doing the cleaning anyway, but he bit his tongue. He couldn't say that to her. He'd married her knowing she was a career woman, and he needed to support that. I do realize that. I'm just on deadline. And your deadline makes it all right for you to ignore me and pretend that you heard me? Are you kidding me? She put her hands on his chest and pushed him away. We've been home for 24 hours, and you've done nothing but sit at that computer. That's not how marriage works. I put dinner together, you could have at least shoved it in the oven so we'd have a hot meal. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. I've lived alone for 10 years. I forget sometimes that there's life outside of the stories in my head. Well, there is. She took a deep breath, realizing she was going a little off the deep end. I hope that you'll be more understanding of what I need you to do in the future. I will. I promise. Jake hoped he could live up to his promise. It was hard to remember there were others around, though. Why, he'd forgotten about his best friend's wedding, and Scott had packed his clothes for him while he finished a scene. They'd barely been on time for their flight. Addie needed to calm down before she said something she really didn't mean. They were never going to be able to work things out if she was constantly angry with him. Would you put dinner in the oven at 350 degrees while I shower? She asked, keeping her voice calm. Showering always worked to calm her. At his nod, she went into the bedroom and chose an old pair of pajamas to change into. She needed to be comfortable, because he seemed to be over sex anyway. When she was finished with her shower, she stood in the bathroom for a few minutes, still fighting her anger. She blow-dried her hair, dressed, and finally went out into the living room. The smell of dinner filled the air. That was better. Jake wasn't at the computer for a change. Instead, he'd set plates on the counter and poured drinks for them. Is there anything else I should make to go with it? He asked, referring to her casserole in the oven. I was just going to make a salad with it. She walked toward the refrigerator, but he stopped her. No, you sit down, and I'll fix it. She was surprised, but not stupid enough to argue with him. She sat on one of the stools and watched him work. He moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete, something she'd noticed before. He didn't seem the type to belong to a gym. How did he stay in shape? Do you work out? She asked. He shook his head. Well, for 1 week out of every month, I do, but I don't think that counts. I tend to go for walks to clear my head when I'm first starting a book, because I need the extra input. He shrugged. Mostly I just work. Why would you work out for 1 week every month? She asked. That didn't make sense to her at all. Well, I have a very strange writing schedule. I tend to work 3 weeks out of the month, and then take 1 week off. So I work 16 or 18-hour days for 3 weeks straight. Sometimes I work 20 hours per day. Then my brain just kind of melts, and all creativity is gone. I work on marketing and admin stuff during that week, but I also go to the gym, I take long walks, and make it to the grocery store. When my 3 weeks start up again, I don't starve to death. That kind of thing. He mixed the salad while he talked, his movements efficient. He obviously knew his way around a kitchen. He served both of their salads and took the stool beside her, turning to her before he ate. I want you to know that I really am sorry about not starting dinner. I do that sometimes, and I'll try not to, but I'm not sure that I can stop. When I get involved with my work, I just can't seem to hear or comprehend what's going on around me. Let's hope there's never a fire while I'm working, because I just don't think I'd notice. Addie nodded. I understand all that. What infuriated me is that you responded to me as if you were listening when you weren't. I just felt ignored and lied to all at once. Of course, I was still hurt that you didn't even notice when I put on something sexy for you before bed last night and you never once glanced at me. That's not supposed to happen a week into marriage. He frowned. I missed that? That's not good. He tilted his head to one side to study her. Want to put it on again later and see if I notice? She pretended to think about it for a minute. Not particularly. She took a bite of her salad, smiling inwardly. He needed to see how it felt, didn't he? He grinned, realizing what she was up to. Doesn't matter. What you're wearing looks pretty darn sexy to me. I'll just take that off you. She laughed. This is an old, faded pair of pajamas. I know it's not sexy. Yeah, but there's a hole, and it's in a very interesting place. She refused to look for the hole, but she knew her face turned bright red. Behave yourself. He shook his head. Women. You behave yourself around them, and they get their feelings hurt. You start acting frisky, and they get all offended. How are men supposed to know what to do? Do you want a hint on how to understand women better? She asked, leaning toward him as if she was about to impart a huge secret. Yeah, how? Read our minds. She got up and walked over to rinse her salad bowl and put it in the dishwasher before taking his and doing the same. Jake watched her with a grin on his face. Being married to Addie was never going to be boring,